Welcome back to Let's Talk Race in Maryland. I'm your host, Harrison Paul. We're going to discuss a few topics. One of them being Suella Braverman was taken on head on by a student, and she was absolutely annihilated. I want to discuss that today. I also want to have a little chat about Rishi Sunak announcing the general election and just giving my thoughts on you know what I mean, on why he's done that for July of this year. But we're going to start off with Suella Braverman and how she was taken on by this student so well. I was proud of this little black girl, this mixed girl. Of course, it's a lot here. It was an 18-minute interview, or I guess debate, and she just did so well. I bet her parents were really proud of her. But we're gonna there's one section about this that I really just wanted to kind of touch and get into, and I'm just going to. This is probably one of my favorite parts of it. So check this out.
Quite often when you scratch the surface a bit, there are some anti-Semitic views. It might come across like you are dismissing anti-Semitism a bit.
I don't think it does, because the thing is, let's talk about the broader context of this, which is Suella Braverman lecturing anyone about racism. I don't think anyone's going to listen to that, basically. You specifically and your government have been the architects of horrific racist policies and whipping. You're talking about hatred, you're talking about violence, you're talking about all of these terrible things. I was watching the thing today, you're saying war is a tragedy and all of this kind of stuff. First of all, capitalism produces all of that tragedy,
right.
Produces racism, produces all these...
I mean, I do wonder if that's the central point, isn't it? Is it? Look, I'll let you come on this, but you know, there have been the
Wonderful. And you see how she looked back at the presenter and smiled because she knew well that she doesn't really care about any racism happening to anybody else that doesn't benefit them financially. And I guess that makes me think of when people say, nothing is about racism, it's about money, it's about funds. Well, I beg to differ, because I know that she definitely hates herself, and I know that she definitely wouldn't have to behave in the way that she is behaving if she was white. I don't think she would force an ideology upon herself and force herself to believe that she is something that she is not, meaning white skin. But as I was on the Suella Braverman hunt that night when I watched that interview, I decided to actually, go and see what else I would find on this woman. Because people like this fascinate me a little bit at times. So I want to play this clip. It's 1 minute 40 seconds. Stick with me as I watch this. But I think it's a very telling clip of who Suella is, and I think it will also nicely introduce us into the Rishi Sunak conversation.
Can I ask you a personal question? Your parents are from Mauritius and Kenya. How do you feel about stopping other people arriving here?
I have no qualms about that, absolutely. And again, this is a kind of a common argument trotted out by the left that, because of the colour of my skin and my heritage, I have to think a certain way and I can't declare certain truths on migration.
You annoy them, don't you? Because you're not left-wing.
I hope I annoy them. That would be my delight if I'm annoying the left. But no, I disagree with that. My parents came here through safe and legal routes. My mother was recruited by the NHS. My dad came here because he was effectively kicked out of Kenya in the 1960s. But they came here legitimately. That was the policy of the government. They came here, they integrated, they loved this country from afar as children of empire. They don't, by the way, have any qualms about extolling the virtues of the British Empire.
And just to touch on that, my mother and her family were huge, fans of the British Empire. And she thinks back to those times and thinks how sad it was that we were so engrossed by our oppression. My mother always shares with me how she knew everything about the royal family. My grandmother, knew everything about the royal family, and especially my grandfather. He loved the royal family, and I'm from Zimbabwe, so of course, the settlers were there in Rhodesia. And this is a tragic thing that the oppression seeped so much into the mind of the African that we began to admire the very people who were not allowing us to have an identity. And she is here championing and celebrating a loss of identity, a moment she was not, and her family were not allowed to identify as who they were. But actually, I got that wrong there, because she actually was in Kenya, and her family were in Kenya. And we all know that while they were in Kenya, Indians were in Kenya. I think that's where she's from. they were oppressing, the people who were there, and not very good to them. So again, we find ourselves in this situation again. But that one is very close and very dear to my family's heart, because I think of my grandfather. My mom always thinks about how independence took place the day my grandfather passed. He passed on the day the Lancashire Agreement was signed. I think it's Lancaster Agreement was signed. So, it's always something that she thinks about and thinks, would he have been able to accept the newfound Zimbabwe? Would he have able to accept, the transition, because he was so indoctrinated by the British Empire and all these kind of things that she always wonders. And it is always hurtful to know that, listen, he was so oppressed under that rule that there was no other choice but to fall in love with the very thing. And in my mother's book, you should go and read it. She has a chapter about how for English class, and there were Zimbabwean kids, African kids, they would have to, during an English class, they would bring a radio, right? And in this radio, they only could afford it once a week. It would only come once a week because they didn't have enough radios. Because majority of the money for school funding was being given to the white schools. It's amazing when you hear the reality of this. It's not just a story in the past that, can you get over it? It's a story. This is my mother. So basically, my mother had to look forward as a young girl to one day of the week when they would play a little, I think you said it was red radio, where it would have a tape playing a British voice and teaching them how to speak English. And she said how she really, they idolized the voice in this little radio of the voice that would speak English and teach them English. And they loved those days. I think it might have been a Friday. And if you think about that oppression, and they dreamed of feeling enough to talk and pronounce words like that person pronounced words. This is not I meet a French friend and he's teaching me French and I'm teaching him English. No, this is wow, I hope one day I'm enough. I hope one day I can pronounce words like that radio. I hope one day I get it right. And then when the radio's off, the rest of the black kids in the hood and the ghettos are judging each other on their words based on how closely you speak English compared to that radio. And this is real life. This is someone's life. And the funding, and the reason they only got the radio once a week is because the funding were going to all the white kids, which were only, I forget, she said a small percentage. And black kids were the higher percentage. So most of the school funding is going to a lower percentage of the population, which is the white population. But we'll continue what she's saying here.
It was the British Empire that brought infrastructure, the legal system, the civil service, the military to countries like Mauritius and Kenya.
So now she's celebrating the infrastructure. I think I put this in my last video. I'll put up on the screen. You guys are going to go check it out. But basically, this infrastructure, guys, we have to get this idea that Western infrastructure is anything that we would have created had we been left to our own devices. Had we, I don't know if that's the right term to use in this case, but I honestly think African people would have created a civilization that was actually really tailored to our values. You always talk about British values. We've got completely different values in Africa. So then here comes the superiority talk again, because you're saying, no, our values are better than your values. But that's what you said at the beginning. So who's to tell you, who's to say that based off our values, we wouldn't have created something very beautiful? But you're saying our values are the best, so good thing we brought our infrastructure to your places. So again, that's an assumption that your values are higher than our values and greater than our values. And it's just so, like, I'm breaking down the mentality here. Honestly, listen to this.
My parents are so proud. On my mum's side there, I think it's her great uncle and auntie fought with the Allies in World War II, and they were so proud of that. So I think, children of empire, there are definitely, there's obviously a mixed picture, and obviously there are bad things about empire. But
history is complex.
History is complex and nuanced, and I'm not going to apologise for empire. I'm not going to apologise for our past. History
Should we
is there
be proud
for
of
us to
empire? Should we be prouder?
I am proud of the British Empire.
Yeah, quite.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I thought of a quote today that I wanted to quote, and I hope that they quote me on this on a day that I no longer on this earth. It will always be the responsibility of the wronged, those who were wronged, to teach those who were doing the wrong what it feels like to be on the other side of things. So basically, they are judging a past over, listen, that's just the way things happened, or listen, that's just the way things were. And if roles were reversed in history, basically, people always say, people colonized each other, people did this and that to each other, people whatever. Human life, it will always be the responsibility of the people who have gone through things to teach the other people, hold on a second, I know you haven't gone through something, but I can understand that person because I too have gone through something. It's funny enough because I was just having a conversation with a brother today, and the brother was kind of a little bit unable to feel the pain of, people who may have been going through a severe mental decline, right? And I was fortunate enough to be able to say, no, hold on, brother. Like, I've actually gone through a kind of almost nearly severe mental decline. And I can tell you that there are moments where I can't even recognize myself in those moments. There's things that I did that I wouldn't even want to repeat out loud because I'm that ashamed of it because I was in a very, very low place. And he's like, wow. So he was able to kind of understand that in that moment, okay, that whereas people who are kind of up on their feet, they're in their brains, and the neural pathway in their brains are able to judge certain situations and issues differently than you and I, we judge them differently than those people who are suffering with mental illnesses and who are obviously in worse and worse and worse places. So, it will always be the job of the people who have gone through things to remind people who have not gone through things what it feels like to be in that position. So you teach, and we teach each other, right? So it is our responsibility to remind the West what it feels like to be on the other side of of colonization. And if it was the other way around, it would be the West a responsibility to teach us what it means to be human and say, hold on the other side of your, victory, what you felt was a victory, for one person, it was a tragedy. And that's what I love about my mother's book. When I read my mother's book and how I always repeat this, only was 16 years old when Zimbabwe got its independence, I was able to, colonization came to life. For me, it was no longer a story. It was no longer oh yes, hundreds of years ago, blah, blah, blah. It was now a real story. It was my mother where she was like, and I love when I sit with her and say, there was days I wasn't allowed to walk, not even days, sorry. There was a time I wasn't allowed to walk in certain places and certain places in town because I knew, white people are walking there. And when you're sitting with your mother and you're thinking, wow, you're standing here today. Or when she's telling you, like in the book, about the story about, when I was a kid and I could only play the radio that had the white voice and how it made her feel, or how she was terrified the first time she went to school with, an all mixed school with white girls, and she was terrified of these girls. And what that felt like. And the embarrassment of not speaking English the way they spoke English, yet she was in her homeland. She had every right to speak it. The way she, however she did. And more so, she had a right to speak her own language that she was no longer allowed to speak on the school premises. And what that made her feel like about herself. And then fast forward a few years, and here I am today, and people are telling you don't have entitlement to this. People are telling you get over it. People are telling you this. People are telling you. So just because you have so internalized your oppression, Suella Braverman, does not mean the rest of us have to do the same thing. So with that, we go on to the next topic of today, where I'm going to quickly touch on, which is Rishi Sunak and the election. And, what is it with these, these coconuts who really have tried to become their masters. And I think one day, Rishi has actually arrived at a place where he's realizing maybe no matter how hard I try, an idiot like Boris Johnson will still go down with a greater reputation than I have. And that must be frustrating, right? Suella Braverman, all the efforts she does to whistleblow, she still her legacy will not go down greater than Boris Johnson's, which is just typical of it. And this is why I am the way I am, because I'm no longer trying to write my legacy amongst white people. In fact, I'd much rather them remember me as a terror than remember me as somebody who tried my best to appease them. And you know what I mean? After all, their legends were our terrors. But guess what? They still got statues of them up. They still got statues of Churchill, and it doesn't matter. So surely, if it's fair game, if it's, oh, geez, that was just the way things were, the way things have to be, where does that grace extend for me where I say this is what I have to do? Right? So anyway, local elections or the general elections are on in the UK, and I really wanted to just give my piece on that and say I hope Jeremy Corbyn wins. I heard that he's running independently. Labour Party, of course, don't really have a backbone. If we look at Keir Starmer, I don't really think he is anybody courageous enough to save the country. Doesn't really have an opinion of his own, a vision of his own. But I'm just going to more so discuss one major point that I want to let people to understand, that the state of the country is due to the racist minds of the people. It's not a result of the Tory party. These people allow themselves to be hoodwinked every single time by somebody who is whistleblowing, somebody who is giving racist innuendos, and they fall for it every time. Someone who they should see from the door is an idiot, lacks capacity, lacks intelligence, lacks wisdom, lacks knowledge, lacks character, lacks so many of these things. How could you feel in your heart that Boris Johnson is somebody who could run a country for me? Not even a person who could really comb his hair, and I say that with all due respect. You know, and really, this man, honestly, and there's so many cases of this. I as I've been back in Europe and living in Europe, or what should I say, as I've been back, grown up now and into politics, I'm understanding that, you know, white people in general, a lot of this country, why do, you know, a lot of them, it's in the state that it's in, is because they do not vote off of qualities, because a lot of these politicians know that they can wave you know, immigration or wave racism in their face. I always say this joke: if a politician knows that he's falling out of love with the general public, he just knows to do an interview and cover that interview with racist innuendos throughout the interview, and he'll win the hearts back of the people. He can be sure that will work. When policies are not working, when all else is failing, he has to remind people how ready he is to be viciously racist. And then he gets his position back. And Suella Braverman has also understood this formula, and she's, you know, acting accordingly. So my thing is this, right? They want us to be people who, and when I'm going back to the topic of Suella Braverman, they want us to be people who apply ourselves to society and forget about everything. I even watched another Suella interview where she was saying, you know, integration and all this kind of stuff, and they're of Britain and they're not in Britain but not of Britain, all these kind of things. And it's just a shame that at the very same token, they want us to forget. And I'm going to put up on the screen a very, very great picture that I've always wanted to share, and I'm going to share it today, where they said Rhodesia, you know what I mean, a letter in a newspaper that was saying Rhodesia is open for, you know, for people to come and take land. And they came, and like I mentioned to you, it was a free-for-all. Everyone take. And yet Britain has never truly apologized for it. They've just tried to cover over it. And there was, even when she mentioned there about the fact they're bringing industrial, you know, infrastructure to Mauritius. What about what we're bringing? because they didn't bring Mauritius infrastructure to Mauritius. They're bringing British infrastructure to Mauritius that she still wants us to celebrate in 2024. So why can't you celebrate the culture that we are bringing and ourselves and our industrial ideas and personalities in 2024? Why can't you celebrate it? Again, is when we were reminded of the one-sided of what, although they say they have forgotten about the past and they no longer see one as superior and one as not superior, you have to be smart enough to read between the lines and see they very much see one culture or one being as superior, and everyone else should follow that. So that is all I have to say about this. No matter who is voted in this general election, no matter what happens, I really do believe at the end of the day, it will take somebody who is clever enough to articulate racism in such a way that looks very appetizing for the British public. And before you know it, we'll have another fool in cabinet destroying the country yet again. So thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe.
And I'm on a mission for you.